Boom, and we're live. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again this week for On.NET Live. My name is Cecil Phillip, and today we got a topic that I'm really excited about. One, because I know nothing about it, but two, I also think it's a really important topic for a lot of folks to really take seriously, and that happens to be security. We're going to learn how we can secure our web APIs using a really interesting package called Microsoft.Identity.Web. And today I have Christos and Kyle here, who are both on the identity team. They're going to help us kind of sort through some of this identity black magic and really understand like what it takes for us to secure web APIs that we build with ASP.NET Core. So, gentlemen, why don't I have you all introduce yourselves really quickly so we can know who you are and what are you doing? Kyle, how about we start with you? Kyle, you're on mute, by the way.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
My mic is getting fuzzy.
You're a little bit low, just a little bit.
Okay. So, hi everybody. So my name's Kyle. I'm on the identity team, and I work a lot with developers on how to best build and optimize for our platform. I'm actually on our go to production team as part of our architecture group. So I work a lot with both IT pros as well as developers on identity questions.
Nice. Christos?
Hey, everyone. What's up? Let's do this. I work at Microsoft in the identity division. I work as a developer advocate, and I spend most of my time talking to developers and helping them build secure solutions using the Microsoft Identity Platform and Azure, but not just Azure, not just .NET. So we do quite a few things, and it's exciting to be here.
Awesome. Well, hey, gentlemen, thank you again so much for being here. And speaking of being here, I'm looking in the chat really quickly, and I'm seeing we have folks from all over the place that are joining us. Again, thank you all for joining us. I see we have some folks from Iran here, some folks from Nicaragua. I know we have some folks from South America and from all over the place. So again, definitely shout out to you if you're joining us from far away. Really appreciate it. And speaking of places that are far away, I actually wanted to share my screen really quickly and talk about something that happened recently. Some of you may or may not have heard about this, but if you're familiar with the island of St. Vincent actually just had a volcano erupt just a few days ago. And I don't know, man, like some of these pictures and stuff are crazy. I'm going to kind of scroll through a video super quick. But, if you look at some of these images, this just happened just the other day, right? This is an active volcano. It is still like spewing smoke and dust and ash and all these types of stuff from the island of St. Vincent, which is an island in the Caribbean. And, folks, again, folks are in really dire need right now. They're needed to be evacuated. There's a lot of, humanitarian relief and a lot of efforts like that set up to help, one, get people off of the island and situated somewhere else, and also get them like food and supplies and things like that. And actually, someone had asked me earlier, where is St. Vincent exactly? So I want to pull up a map really quickly. Yes, I am using Bing, so in case anyone's wondering. But this is where St. Vincent is kind of located, right? So if we look at, I'm going to zoom out a lot, right? So I'm in Florida, right? So this is where I am. Here's South America. And St. Vincent, I'm going to zoom in, right? So it's right here. It's, just to the west. It's just to the right side of Barbados. So if I know folks are familiar with Barbados is, you can see exactly where that is. But, all the smoke from this volcano is reaching out and, affecting all these other islands and stuff. So it's really crazy what's happening. Like, I never thought I'd be in a moment where there's an active volcano kind of erupting. So, for all the folks that, maybe you have Caribbean family members or, maybe you've been there before, definitely, they really need our help right now. Things are really serious over there. So if you can, send them your thoughts and your prayers. And, if you could do a little bit more than that, then I'm sure they'd appreciate that as well. But also another thing I wanted to do really quickly, this week is actually Ramadan, or not this week, but this month is Ramadan. So shout out to all our folks too that are celebrating Ramadan. So Ramadan is from April 12th to May 12th. So, I know a lot of our Muslim friends that are watching from different parts of the world. We definitely want to tell you, happy Ramadan. And I hope you and your family, we all wish you all the best. Now, that being said, why don't we dive into some links and then, I could stop talking and we can let the experts kind of dig into like the security stuff. So first thing I wanted to shout out really quick in terms of links. So just yesterday, April 14th, we had an event called Learn Together, Building Apps with Microsoft Graph, which is, again, Microsoft Graph is our APIs that give you a lot of insight into what's going inside of your Microsoft 365 account. And, this was live streamed yesterday and all the videos are already up. So if you're interested in learning about Microsoft Graph, I'll share the link to this. This is actually on channel 9 and you can kind of watch some of these videos and learn about, using Microsoft Graph. I think there's some here about building bots and personal assistants, working with Teams data and things of that nature, which is really cool. So definitely check that out. And another thing that I wanted to share with you, which I thought was pretty relevant to what we're talking about today, we actually have a beginner series to web APIs. So maybe some of you are just getting started with .NET, maybe just getting started building web APIs with .NET. We have, again, 100% freely available beginner series to web APIs. I think it's about 18 videos that covers things like, routing and, HTTP requests and responses. We don't cover security, but, maybe in part 2 we'll get to that. I know Christos is going to be mad at me for that. I apologize. So, but again, if you're just learning about web APIs, this is a really good course for you to check out. And last but not least, again, another resource that I think is very relevant to what we're going to talk about today. And that's this on.NET episode that actually Christos and Kyle did just around December, so not too long ago, talking about MSAL and Microsoft.Identity.Web. So again, I'll share these links in the chat, and you'll be able to find them and check them out if you're interested. But again, I hope you all take a look at some of these. Now, I'm going to take my screen off because y'all have heard enough from me. And this is not the Cecil show anymore. This is going to be like the Christos and Kyle show, right? That's what we're doing today. So gentlemen, why don't we start talking about Microsoft.Identity.Web? And I think a good place to start is, well, what is it? And why do we have it? What is it for? What exactly, are we expecting developers to do with it?
Sure. So it's, as I look at ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core, right? Obviously, Core is the new wave here, but for quite a while, these platforms have had built into them some basic capabilities for around the modern authentication and authorization. So this token-based process to authenticate a user and to authorize an API. So at the heart of these platforms, there is, for example, an OpenID Connect capability. There is a capability to use JOT bearer tokens for authorizations for APIs. So that's built into .NET Core. Where it becomes interesting is, what do I need specifically to start doing things that optimize those two components to use Azure Active Directory or Microsoft identities as the actual identity provider there. So Microsoft.Identity.Web makes it very easy for you to go ahead and use Microsoft Identity in order to be that identity provider across your applications and APIs. So it's a way of making the core capabilities of .NET Core a lot easier and more efficient for you to use as a developer.
Okay, and that makes sense. And one of the things that I always think is, every time someone says easy and security, I always get really scared. Because in my head, I'm like, security and easy aren't always synonymous. But I really feel, like this particular NuGet package is really helping us go in that way of really, making security something that all developers could do in a very comfortable way without having to pull out their hair and stress out too much. Now, one thing I want to ask you too, again, before we really dive into the demos, how much do I need to know about security protocols to use Identity.Web? So I know there's, OpenID, and I know there's OAuth 1, 2, 2.1, stuff, right? There's JOT tokens and bearer tokens and all kinds of stuff. If I just want to secure my API, my web API, like how much of that do I really need to know?
Well, if you're talking about the web API itself, almost nothing. What happens for a web API? For when we protect an API, what happens regardless of how I might have acquired the token? So we got protocols of how the application is going to acquire a token. For a web API, it's actually a very straightforward thing. You're going to get an authorization header and a bearer token And that's really what lands on your doorstep. Someone makes a call to your web API. Your API says, I need authorization in order to call my API. I need to know that who the user is in context. I need to know that the user has allowed your application access to my resource, to my API. And it does that by presenting a token. Now, once that API gets the token, it doesn't need to go off and call Microsoft Identity for anything. It doesn't authenticate. It doesn't go through a user flow or anything like that. It inspects the token, and as you mentioned, we use a JSON Web Token or JOT token, which have a way of doing validation of the token without always calling back to the identity provider. You do need to call to get our signing keys and cache those. But generally, you don't call us very often. And then you simply go through the process, the steps that Microsoft.Identity.Web and ASP.NET Core build in for you of, is this token valid? Meaning, has it been tampered with? And then I need to check to make sure it's coming from someone I trust. It needs to be targeted at me and so on. So I look at the information that's contained in this token. We call those things claims, a name attribute pair we just refer to as claims. Your application, your API rather, inspects these claims to determine how the application will work, or how the API rather will work in this case. So I don't need to know OpenID Connect or OAuth 2 or anything. Yes, I'm the ultimate beneficiary of that as an API implementation, but I don't actually have to know those protocols at all.
And so I'm guessing, assuming that we're using the identity platform, right, which everyone should be using, I'm guessing that I could just rely on that thing to do its job, right? Like, we're going to rely on that thing to issue the tokens and, handle our registrations and our client registrations and our app registrations. And on my side, I can just work with Identity.Web, the package and the collection of libraries that's associated with that. And I could just focus on business logic more so than the right flow and the right responses to these security claims.
That's absolutely our desire. We don't want to see developers digging into the protocol. There's nothing wrong with rolling up your sleeves and doing the protocol, but you have to be aware of what you're investing in. These protocols are under constant surveillance, if you will, and if a vulnerability were to determine, there'll be a mitigation that's also determined, and therefore it'll be on you to go and implement that mitigation if something were to come up. So these protocols are constant under evaluation. So today, for example, we have OAuth 2.0, but OAuth 2.1 is already in the wings and being worked on, and it's changing things. Right, it's saying, oh, this practice is no longer allowed. So, for example, implicit flow, one of the new details of these protocols. Today, it used to be recommended, and now we're not recommending it anymore. Come OAuth 2.1, we'll say you can't use it anymore, and all of that would be work you would have to keep up with if you did a protocol level implementation. When you use Microsoft Identity Web in your in your .NET Core, you can do things like, I'm using it on the client side to acquire the tokens. I don't need to go and learn protocols. I can just say, here's what I need to do. You do that by something called a scope. My intention is to read data. My intention is to write data. Once you ask for a token that authorizes your application to access that resource, then you go ahead and pass that token off to the API. So with Microsoft Identity.Web, we want to make it a lot more straightforward. So you focus on, well, what's the right thing to request? Am I reading? Am I writing? Do I need something else? And then making sure that you provide that, and everyone can simply work off those tokens being exchanged.
Awesome. Well, that sounds like a really good introduction. How about we dive into some code and take a look at the demo, and we could see how we can start plugging some of these things together.
Okay. So
I want maybe while Kyle is doing that, there are a couple of questions that we could answer. One of them is, what is the relationship between Microsoft Identity.Web and MSAL, right? So Microsoft Identity.Web is built on top of MSAL, and even though you're not interacting directly with MSAL anymore, it uses MSAL behind the scenes to acquire tokens for you. It's also free, so Microsoft Identity.Web is a free package that you get via NuGet. and you need an Azure Active Directory or a B2C to authenticate somewhere. It doesn't work with other providers at this time. The team has big plans, but I can't promise anything. But yeah, this is the question that we had live, so I thought we might want to answer it because other people may be looking into this and have some questions.
Yeah, for sure.
Kyle.
For sure.
Okay,
right,
so
Kyle,
actually,
I got your screen up. So yeah, why don't we dive into it?
Okay, so actually, I want to start before coding. Unfortunately, sorry about that, folks, but I would like to think about some design questions that I want to have in mind and to think about as I create my API. So the first decision, if you will, is I'm going to protect my API with Microsoft Identity. So having made that decision, I have to do something, and specifically, I have to go and create an app registration. So let's do that. And in this case, we're going to create a new app registration. This is so that I can declare, if you will, to Azure AD or Microsoft Identity that that I want to delegate this capability, this functionality off to Microsoft Identity and Azure AD. So let's create the .NET Live API. Now this is just a display name, so I don't have to have underscores or anything. I can make it nice and readable for my user. And now I do have to make my first decision, which is where will my users come from? If I'm writing a line of business API, maybe I only want people to be able to use this API if they're from the tenant in which I'm registering this API. So in other words, in my company, I'm creating an API only for my company's use. So I'll restrict it to only my company's users. But I could ask for users from other providers, like anyone with an Azure Active Directory identity, and so on. So I'll go ahead and use this as a multi-tenant API. It's a choice, and one of the nice things about Microsoft.Identity.Web is we'll help you specifically deal with the nuances that a multi-tenant API in Microsoft Identity is. Basically, under the covers, there's going to be lots of different issuers, and that's a big hassle to. If I was just using the ASP.NET Core, it's kind of a hassle to set all that up. Microsoft Identity handles that entirely for me, so it's much easier for me to create a multi-tenant API. In other words, I will allow people to use this application for many different companies, or this API.
Wait, so is that it? Like, are you done registering?
I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. So far, I have an app registration. So I'm going to do a couple of things here. First off, I want to do a little cleanup. I'm going to go to the API permissions. So this would be the APIs that this API is asking to call. And I don't need any of these because I'm an API myself and I'm not planning to call yet any other API. So I don't need that. So I'll just clean that up. The key part here is I need to say I'm going to expose an API. So I'm declaring now that my application is exposing an API. So the first thing I'll do, now we have two different kinds of what we call scopes or permissions that I would deal with as an API designer. I have to think, what do I want my API clients, the people calling my API, what do I want them to be able to use on behalf of a user? So I want to have an API that lets me read the user's email or read the user's data. So that's one tier, acting on behalf of a user. I might also, as an API designer, think, hey, I want to have it so that somebody could write a background process or a service of some description where the user isn't there, but it needs to work across different users and without a user present. In that case, I'm going to create a application permission. Let's start with just a delegated permission, a scope where I'm only going to work on behalf of the user. Now, the first thing I actually have to do is set my application ID URI. I can either do it here, or if I try to get away without doing it, we're going to make somebody do this step first, which is, this is basically the identifier of your API. We need to have a unique identifier across the scope here, or across the enterprise here, to make sure that, if you're not asking for a scope, maybe we all want to name a scope read, and obviously I need to know whose read scope is being referred to here. So we need a unique identifier, which is why we just pop up our first suggestion is, hey, you can use the API model, and simply we'll use your app ID, which is the unique identifier for your API. I could, if I wanted to, say I have an API I'm going to be publishing, maybe I'll use an HTTP address. That's okay. We will give you some hints about what's not allowed. I think if I type in enough wrong characters here, it'll tell me. But I can go ahead and type in a few different. I can use an API. I can use an HTTPS address. We will start checking if you're a multi-tenant API and you say you want to use an HTTP address. It has to be an HTTP address that's registered to your tenant. So you can't say I'm exposing some other an API for some other entity. So I will. This is really just the identifier, and it doesn't mean that you have anything implemented there. Obviously, I don't have anything implemented at API : but it is a way for me to uniquely identify my API. When someone says, "Hey, I want a token to use this API," there's my identifier. So we'll start.
So then just to recap really quickly. So all that you've done so far, you've gone into the Azure portal, right? You've gone into your Active Directory application listing, app registrations, created a new app registration, and this app registration is going to represent the API that you haven't deployed yet, but you will at some point. And then now the things that you're thinking about is, well, how do I want people to interact with this API? Like, who's going to use it? What types of processes or clients are going to be able to interact with this thing and request security credentials?
Right, and now I'm starting to think about what are the functions I'm going to have in my API? Can I provide what we call a least privilege model? What we want is we want a developer to be able to say, my application is only going to be used to read data. And therefore, the tokens we issue to that application will only allow reading data. And that way, should there ever be a compromise of the token or the application, it can't be misused to write data instead. Right? So we want to make sure that an application developer can effectively declare his intent. I intend to just read this data, or I intend to update the data. And we provide the capability only to do what the developer claimed they wanted to do. Right? So what I want to do is, we could have a one scope for the whole API, like access as user, but that doesn't allow me to have a more sophisticated model going forward. Like, hey, you know what? I've got a new API, and it resets, say, the data for the user. Therefore, I should only have some applications be allowed to do that. I need to make sure that that application was implemented correctly or done, coded correctly. So as an API designer, I'm deciding now, what levels can I provide? I can have a read scope and maybe a write scope. Maybe I have a special one for delete. It all depends on what I expect the shape of my API to be. So here, I'll just declare a read scope. My next decision is, who would allow to consent? And this is, as an API designer, this is my suggestion to you, to both the developers who are using my API, as well as the IT pros who are approving in lots of enterprises who gets to use this, whether this app is allowed to access this resource. This is my way of saying, how sensitive is this permission? So if I say admins and users can consent to this, I'm saying it's okay for a regular user to say, I want to use an app that uses this API. If it's so, for example, in our Microsoft Graph API, user.read is that. We think it's okay for a user to say, I'd like to sign into this app. I could say that only admins are allowed to grant this permission, meaning an admin should have a solid look at this application to determine if it really is trustworthy enough to have access to that information. So we have a user.read.all consent or scope that only admins can approve, because there's a lot of sensitive information in reading the full user profile of everyone in the enterprise. I would know, for example, who reports to who. And if I'm going to target a phishing attack, that's a great bit of information to know. So we want to make sure that we can fully trust an app that would get that scope. So for read, we'll go ahead here and pick my users and admins. And here I can say, read your data. So this is the message that's going to go to the user when they see the prompt. Hey, this application would like to read. So I can say, read your data here. That's just the display name. I can give a little bit more description here. That's what the user sees. Now, if I have an admin consent item or one that has both, I also have an option here of giving. This was the first one, was the admin. I have this option of saying the admin can do it. So I would say read the user's data, and here I would have more information. Sorry, I got these in the wrong order. I can have more description here. And then I might say, what would the user see if they weren't an admin and see this? So I have this option of customizing the consent experience based, again, on describing what it is they're allowing an application to have access to. If you say that the application in question gets read permission, what does that mean? Right? So this is your opportunity to make a case, if you will, to both the user and to the IT pro, if they're managing this, as to why what exactly is the result of someone granting that consent to an application that requests it. So we'll go ahead and add that scope. I would then go ahead and add another scope, which we won't do right now, but to do least privilege, I have read. Maybe I only have reading in my API, but then I would want to write, for example, I probably want to have a write that goes along with that. Because this is, that allows this least privilege model. I'll just fill them all in the same. But in this case, since it's right, I'll say this requires admin consent. And now I have an opportunity to have a least privilege model for the client APIs that are going to call my app. So that's how I define a delegated permission or a scope, so that an application can now come and say, I would like to be authorized to call your API's read capabilities, or maybe the read capabilities and the write capabilities. I can design what these scopes look like and the shape of the consent model around my API by how I define these scopes.
Got it. That makes sense.
Now, there's one other type of permission. So let's go ahead here and I'll start a quick application that might be using this this API. So I'll start a quick app registration here. And we'll make this a multi-tenant app as well, although we could be single-tenant. They're not associated here. They're not necessarily linked. Any application could be calling this API. In this case, of course, we will be declaring an API permission. So let me go ahead and add here. So I go to API permissions. I've declared that this app exists. Now I want to say this app is going to call our .NET Live API. So I'll go to add a permission. We try to make it a little easier for folks to find the permissions. So first off, we list all of the APIs from Microsoft that are actually protected with Microsoft Identity. Mm-hmm. We also show all of the APIs that are already available in your enterprise. And this might be short or long, depending upon how many capabilities are using your enterprise. To shortcut this a little bit more, since I registered the API, I can find all of the APIs that I own or registered here. And here I see that I have a delegated permission defined. I can't do anything about application permissions yet, but there's my delegated permission, and I can pick which one I want to have my application use. And notice here, so when I
just really quickly here, now, so yep. You have two registrations. You have one for the API itself, and yes. Now you have to have another one for the client that's going to call the API, right?
Yep.
So if person X, third-party person X, wanted to build an app, I don't know, maybe Kyle and Christos' amazingcompany.com, right, has an API. They'll have to have some kind of way to create a registration for that API before they could start making calls to it.
They would only register the client part, the one we just did now. They wouldn't register the API because we've already done that. Yep. But they would register like this, another app that wants to call this API.
Got it. And I think that was important to say because we have someone in the chat from YouTube, and Edward's asking, could this be integrated with a Xamarin app? So, just like you created a client registration, you'd have to create a registration for that Xamarin app itself. And then very similar type of steps you'd have to follow right now.
Right. And you do an app registration for the clients who will call this API. And certainly these apps can run anywhere. They can run we have Microsoft Authentication libraries, the MSOL libraries for a lot of environments. There's a lot of open source, OpenID Connect certified libraries that you could also use from just about anywhere. So really, you can run so far we haven't done anything that's tied to anything. It's not tied to Azure. It's not tied to any of our libraries. But certainly we provide lots of great tools if you want to use those.
Got it.
So I'm going to do one quick more thing before we pass off to Christos so he can show you a cool demo. I'm going to also want to expose an application permission. So what I've done here is allowed an application with a user sitting in front of it. Then whenever a user sits in front of an application, you always want to do these on behalf of delegated scopes, because the application should be bound to only what the user is allowed to do. What we don't want is an application that's allowed to read everybody, and then somehow the user or a bad actor finds a way to compromise the app and expose information that user should not have been able to see. So what we want to do is make sure that whenever a user is in front of an app, we always do a delegated permission. The app is only allowed to act on behalf of the user. But there are lots of things that don't have users in front of them. I have a background task that goes through and archives the data every night, or analyzes the data for this, that, and the other thing as well. So how do I make it so that those developers can also use my API? First off, I have to think, what capabilities will I provide to these APIs? I might have a slightly different set of API here. So for example, I might be able to say, data.read or data read for my user delegated permission, but I might need to say, well, read this specific user's data for my application permission, because the application, is the only one who could tell me which user's data to interact with, because this identity system doesn't know who the user is. There is no user. So if I want to expose an API, that capability, I actually have to do something slightly different. Instead of exposing another scope, I'm going to expose something called an app role. So we use app roles because what we're really going to do is create the API designer is going to create a role, and then we're going to assign that role to the application itself in order to call our API as an application instead of a user. So I'll go ahead here and create an application role. So in this case, let's call this one read write. I would probably want something similar in terms of least privilege that I did on the user ones. I'd want probably a read and maybe a read write, but I'd want to provide a least privilege option for my developers. In this case, our allowed member types here is going to be an application, meaning I want to assign an application to this role, so that becomes this app permission. I use a similar construct, these app role, if I wanted to assign roles for my API to individual users or groups. So I could have an API in my enterprise and say, well, if a user from this group is using this API, they get admin capabilities. But if the user isn't from that group or isn't assigned the admin role, they get a different set of capabilities. So I can actually assign or declare that I want roles from my API that are assigned to users and groups. In this case, we'll go ahead and just ask for applications, but it's possible even to do both. So again, I have the display name. Let's make this a little bit nicer. We'll say it's read and write, because this is a human readable section. The value that my application will get in a role claim is what I'll write here. So that's what I'm going to look for in my role claim. And then I have a description again that will be shown to the admin when they grant this permission. So I've defined that. So now I have an application permission. So if I show how an application might declare this, now I would never want to declare an application that both had application permissions and delegated permissions, because that leaves a security hole where the application could be compromised. But let me go ahead here. Oops, I'm in the wrong tab. Let's go back to our client. I'll go ahead here. Oh, I declared that client. I'm sorry, I declared that on the app on the client, not the API. But it's the same steps for the API. And if I went to the application permission here and were to declare one, you'll see that because I've declared, in this case it went on the client, because I did the app role, the app permission tab is now turned on.
Ah, got it. Okay.
Right. So I apologize, I put it on the wrong client. The reason we allow that, by the way, is there's nothing preventing an application from both being an app and exposing an API. Right, depending upon how the infrastructure of how your application is developed, both are possible. So it is a valid thing. It's just that that wasn't intending for this app to expose an API.
Sure, that's fine. And that would be a situation where you wanted to have an API call another API, for instance, and so you might want to give that API a particular role or something.
Yes, yes, exactly. If I had that, I would do that. So at this point in time, I'll hand it over to Christos, so we can actually see this in action.
Nice. Let's do it.
So as the action.
So I'm going to switch over to Christos's screen. There we go.
Yep.
And your screen's up.
Perfect. Okay. Now, we're going to take what Kyle has said, and we're going to use it actually to, I know it's a sensitive subject, but we have a Volcano API, which I was not planning for this show. So timing is weird. But if you search for Cosmos DB data, one of the samples that we provide you, it's a Volcano dataset. So I loaded that on Cosmos because usually APIs are not terminators. They will be the gateway to your data. It could be another API. It could be a third-party API. It could be our first-party APIs like Graph, SharePoint, and what have you. And it can also be data. You could be accessing data, and lots of apps are doing CRUD. So an API approach is perfect because you can have a mobile app that calls your API, but you can also have a web app, you can have a desktop app. Therefore, most of the logic goes into the functionality. Someone's asking about a theme. My theme is a bearded theme. It's the bearded theme because it needs to go with my beard. So if you if you go for theme here, then there you go. It's called Bearded. It's a fantastic and download it. Although today GitHub released some fantastic themes as well, so go and have a look at them. I haven't tested them out. So
yeah, that is a really nice theme.
That is a really nice theme. I know it's nice and mellow, not too bright. Video on GraphQL. You know what? We take that request and we'll put on our 45. So in fact, we were going to collaborate with Hasura, because they have Azure AD integration, so we can authenticate users with Azure AD and then use Azure AD to authenticate back to Hasura for GraphQL. And I suspect that there are other GraphQL solutions there. But for now, we're going to use Cosmos DB. And I want to use Cosmos DB because there's an exciting announcement about Cosmos. 2 weeks ago, we did announce a GA support for RBAC permissions to Cosmos, which means that we can now use Azure AD and RBAC to not only authenticate users to Cosmos, but also restrict their access using RBAC permissions and also use managed identities. So unlike in the past where you had to provide a Cosmos key to authenticate to your Cosmos client and call the data, now we can do all that without using any passwords or any secrets or anything else. So my API here does two things. One is integrating with Microsoft.Identity.Web. So we have a front end. Right now, we're going to use Postman for the sample, but you could be using anything. In fact, the GitHub repo I shared has a Xamarin app that calls into these and gets the data and displays it nicely. And so we're using on line 24 with a single line of code. I'm switching on authentication. I mean, it can't get easier than that. I don't know. We eliminate code altogether. I don't know. And then
that's just one line of code. And I'm guessing that
Gotcha.
configuration is my
yes,
tenant
let's see the configuration.
But
it's there's nothing sensitive here because remember what I said. Sorry, up here. Remember what I said. I don't have any client secrets, and the API is not doing, and on behalf of it, is not trying to get any tokens. So it's the Azure identity that actually does that for us. Therefore, I don't have to have a client secret. I'll talk about that in a second because that's a great segue to something I want to talk about. But what this API is doing currently, it's accepting an access token. It makes sure that the token is valid. It will check for signatures. It will check for expiration date and everything else. And then in my controller, this fantastic controller over here, it doesn't do much. It just says, go and get me the data. It's a read-only permission. So if I wanted to write to my Cosmos, it will fail miserably. Obviously, the scope is not named accurately. So I named the scope access Cosmos data. I should say read Cosmos data probably, or read-only Cosmos data. It would probably be more appropriate. But I only have one permission. And then, so someone is asking about RBAC. So RBAC is resource-based access control. So not ARBUCK. If Cecil can send a link to that, it means that you can actually use resource-based access control to finely tune the permissions to your resource. You can create custom ones, or you can create, you can use the built-in ones. For Cosmos and Azure AD, you need to use a custom policy right now, but they have fantastic documentation on how to achieve this. And I'll be putting a blog post as well very, very soon, so you can follow along. Now, in here, the magic happens on line 21. In this line, we actually get the token, so we make sure that the access to this controller is authorized. So you need to have a valid token here, otherwise you get a 401. But if you come into this action on the get and you don't have the right scope in your token, so not just any token, it needs to have the right scope, then this one will blow away and will return a 403 and will say you're not authorized. So you're authenticated, but you're not authorized to access the data because you're missing the scopes. And in the past, I don't know if you ever had to do this yourself, artisan code. But before Microsoft.Identity.Web, you had to write 25, 30 lines of code to look into the token, make sure that it has the right claims, and do all that. We do that for you in a single line of code. And once you pass that, then we call into line 21, yes. And then we call into the data service. Now, the data service is where the other magic happens. And we don't get to talk about managed identities that frequently because it's another fantastic thing. If you're running on Azure, then Microsoft.Identity.Web underpins a lot of resources with managed identities. So your front end can have a managed identity, and within that context that your application is running, you can also configure the backend to be aware of that managed identity and allow you to securely access that data without having to authenticate. The authentication happens behind the scenes for you. And what you see here on line 13 is me instantiating a token credential using the Azure Identity Library. And I say, I want to be very explicit about that. I say, you can authenticate on the local machine. It's going to use my Azure CLI credential. And then when it's running in production, it's going to use the managed identity credentials. Because on the local machine, it's not running on Azure, so I can't have a managed identity. But I don't have to change my code. This code can run locally and in production without changing a single line of code, and I don't have to authenticate. And then further down, I'm just saying, create a Cosmos client with this token credential, and it is provided for me, and I don't have to do anything. So let's see it in action, because I've been talking a lot, and I haven't had the chance to run it.
And then we do have a couple of questions too
let's do this.
that I wanted to ask. So a couple of questions from the chat. So first one is, when you're showing that change credential, I think some folks have seen the default credential, default user credential. What's the difference between what you did and using like the default one?
Well, I don't like the default one because it will bring anything in the sync, right? It will say,
so it brings all the stuff?
Yeah. It will sequentially try everything. It will say, do I have anything in the environmental variables? No. Do I have anything in Visual Studio? No. Do I have anything in Visual Studio Code? No. So it will try all the permutations. And because I want to be explicit about how we authenticate users, I tend to either say chain token credential, or just provide it to you. I think the chained one is the best because you can explicitly or fine-tune the providers. But there's no difference. You can use the default if you want and go with the simplicity. But I like to know where the credentials are coming. So if it fails on my local machine, I know that my Azure CLI credentials have expired, or I need to re-authenticate, or something is wrong. And the way I would usually do it is probably set up a service principal on my Azure CLI. So I'm signing in on my local machine with a service principal account that has a lot less permissions than me running GAD permissions on my subscription, because a lot of damage can happen, as we all know. I've done my fair share of damage there. So now the API is running, right? So the API is now running, and it's expecting a token to be passed. So let's see. I'm going to use Postman for this. I think I have deleted my token, so it doesn't have a token. Down here, we should get a 401 no. You know what? I haven't deleted my token. That's fine. So let's go and remove the token from here. Let's give a broken token. Right? I've deleted half the characters.
That'll be an old token from an old demo. So I'm guessing you'd have to get a new token.
Yeah. So this one, you see, it says 401 here. It failed miserably because I don't have a token. So let's go and grab a token. This one is using client credentials, but one thing you can see here is that I have the scope. So I'm authenticating, and I'm also requesting a token, an access token for my API. And down here, I'm going to get a new access token. It may or may not prompt me for authentication. It's prompting me now. Oh, no, it doesn't. I'm already authenticated with that account. So it knows the authentication succeeded. Let's say, let's use this token. And now if I call that same endpoint, the 5001 volcano, it runs. And we go back to volcanoes. The same application, exactly the same application, is running in production. So right now, it's using my Azure CLI credentials. But if I go into my production environment, let's switch to that. It's running here. Under my CM API demo, I have an identity configured. So this identity that my demo is running under is configured to be able to speak to Cosmos. If I didn't do that, then it wouldn't be able to access the code. And I haven't changed anything here in terms of secrets, in terms of anything else. The exact same code has been passed to production. So I deployed. In fact, we deployed while we're doing the demo this morning. So that was exciting.
Nice.
What I want to say here is, if we go back to the code, because in some cases, you may want to access secrets that are not part of your resources. Let's say an API key for a third-party provider that's not stored anywhere. .NET can also, or ASP.NET has a fantastic segue into working with, I'm in the wrong place here. I need to go into program to bootstrap your config files with secrets that are pulled directly from Key Vault. So if you haven't seen this one, again, this is managed identities, all working behind the scenes to make it for you. So if I jump to my app settings, you'll see I have a SAM config value that comes from Key Vault, right? And that means that if I were to, right now it's empty, but when my application bootstraps in program, it will go and find all the secrets I have in Key Vault, and it will try to map them to my config, right? And then I can populate these config values on the fly as the application is running. This is not directly associated with Microsoft.Identity.Web, so I see we're slightly diverting from that, but I'll do a full circle and come back, because as of yesterday, we released Microsoft.Identity.Web 1.9.
That's fresh. This is brand new.
It's brand new. And if you see down here, it says it adds support for Azure SDKs, which means that now we can authenticate the user, grab an access token, and then do an on behalf of the user call to resources. So in this instance, it's using the storage account. And what you see here is there's a call that comes in here in the blob. Then it actually gets a scope for that. It's using the iToken acquisition to go and grab a token, and then it passes it back to the blob client. And then within the blob client, we can actually create a new blob. So in the past, you had to use Azure Identity, and it wasn't very clear. You had to create a custom MSAL provider, but now it's built in. So they work very, very well. So the example I showed you there, if you go back into the API permissions, for example, let's go here. That's not the right one. We're here. Let's see if I can find the right one there. And then in API permissions, I don't think we have one for Cosmos, but let's see. Oh, we do have one. Check this out. So now nice. I can create a permission here. I can say user impersonation, and I can use the exact same code. Instead of saying create blob, we can say that will be our storage account.
That's
and
awesome.
That is awesome. I didn't even know. I just found out like an hour before we went live on the stream.
Just 2 seconds ago. Nice.
So it's fully end to end, and it's working great. It protects you from doing silly things. We've made the experience a lot smoother, from implementing it to getting tokens to securing access to other resources, and I love it. Like Microsoft.Identity.Web is my favorite toy.
I can imagine. So we got a whole bunch of questions. I want to make sure we take some time to go through some of these.
Let's do this.
So first one, this one's coming in from YouTube. And this person is asking, so I'm rather new to .NET, so will this enable me to stop using JWT as a way to secure my APIs? So I always love when you folks answer questions. So I always want to make sure we give them a moment and acknowledge them. So, Kyle, you or Christos, whoever wants to answer, you want to take this?
Sure.
Kyle, off you go.
Under the covers, we'd use JWT tokens. So it takes away you having to think about them. Like, as you can see, we have APIs that that are handling it for you. But under the covers, the scope that that was checking for in the code we looked at earlier, that was passed to the API with a JWT token. So it doesn't remove them; it just makes them a whole lot easier to work with.
Nice. And then next question we have, also from YouTube. This person is saying, I'm guessing this has to do with the API the API code you showed, Christos. Do we have to call verify a user has any accepted scope in every action, or can this be moved into a class like a filter or some sort?
You could, but then again, the point here is that different actions will probably have different scopes, right? And therefore, like there might be a get access, sorry, get all the volcanoes, but then there could be another endpoint or another action there that says write volcano, and then another one for delete. And the expectation there is that users should either have the right scope there or pass the right scope. And I would probably avoid giving a blank scope to everyone. Like Kyle showed before, we can have an admin-only scope that people can go and manage the data, and then a user and admin scope, which is for reading data. It depends on how you put your actions, maybe, I don't know, but you could probably have a global filter for that specific controller, and then you can have another scope and a filter for that for another controller. So it definitely depends on your API design, but it is possible. You don't have to call it, but best practice would be to always check for the right scope.
Sure.
Yes.
And I completely agree with that. That makes a lot of sense. Also coming in from YouTube, this person is saying, so how does Microsoft Identity.Web, I'm guessing, handle token renewal?
So if you're implementing an API, there is no token renewal because it's a receiver of tokens. Therefore, you just get the token. It's either valid at that instant or it's not, and you proceed. On the client side, so if I have the app that's calling my API, we handle token renewal under the covers with respect to, like, one of the things we provide is Microsoft.Identity.Web works with our MSOL library to handle all of the caching of the tokens, so that when you just ask for a scope, I need a token for this scope, we make sure we get the right token for you. Now, that might mean that under the covers, we have to go and refresh the token, which would happen in something like an ASP.NET core web app, would happen using the auth code flow and refresh tokens and a bunch of stuff at the protocol level that I don't really need to worry about, because our MSOL, we handle reacquiring those tokens for you automatically.
Got it.
Yep.
Here's a question
and there's caching, by the way, right? We have built-in caching with a single line of code, so you don't have to implement your own caching on top of that. Yeah, I forgot to mention that.
Okay. Here's a question that I know y'all get probably pretty often. I know I get it randomly as well. This person says, I'm currently using Identity Server 4. Can you migrate to this easily? And I guess when he means migrate to this, means migrate to the identity platform easily. And how would you do that migration, if that's possible?
Well, if you want to migrate, usually it involves checking out a lot of old codes and bringing the few lines of code from Microsoft.Identity.Web and the new library. Obviously, I don't know what the code of this person looks like, and there might be some complex logic. I mean, Identity Server can achieve a lot of things and do a lot of stuff, so there might be some configuration settings that also need to happen on the AD side of things. So it's not just the code changes, but also AD changes. And Kyle may have more experience on that than me.
Yeah, the first thing is that when you use something like Identity Server, you're really abstracting away. You're having a directory and a solution specifically for your solution. Our offering in that space is really more Azure Active Directory B2C, which allows me to have a directory for my solution that isn't necessarily relying on a particular enterprise, a particular Azure AD instrumentation. So slightly different. Now, if I'm today using, I'm selling primarily to Azure AD customers, maybe I'll use Microsoft Identity or the MSOL web, Microsoft.Identity.Web, etc. But if I have an application today that's backed by Identity Server, I could look at, are there settings, as Christos mentioned, are there settings and configurations I need on Azure Active Directory B2C And then from there, I'm going to still use OpenID Connect, which is what Identity Server uses out of the bucket, out of the box. But I will have to make some adjustments to working in our B2C world, where we have different things like sign-up flows and so on. So there is a bit of work at the conceptual level. They're very similar, but the devil is in the details here.
Yep. Now I know a lot of folks usually ask, like, how do I choose between B2C and Azure AD? Could you very briefly give folks like the feature set difference, or when would I do one versus the other?
Well, for me, it comes down to what we were just saying. I use Azure AD B2C if I'm looking for a directory and authentication for my solution specifically. We call it business to customers because we allow customers to bring their own identities, not just corporate identities you can federate with an Azure AD or a SAML or an OpenID Connect provider, but also consumer-grade identities like Facebook and Twitter and so on, where I can bring those identities. But the directory, if you will, the list of users and the profiles of those users is stored within the Azure AD B2C tenant. So I'm effectively providing that resource to my solution. When I build a multi-tenant app for Azure AD, I'm saying I'm going to use the infrastructure that's been provided by my customer. So I could use that approach and build an OpenID Connect client. So lots of people build those kinds of applications. Lots of people have built in the past SAML-based applications that can just be configured to call to an identity provider like Microsoft Identity or Azure AD that supports, say, OpenID Connect. So I could build a generic client that understood how to call OpenID Connect, and that would work on the infrastructure of my of who I'm providing the solution to, whether my own business or someone I'm selling the software to.
So then, is it fair for me to say then that Azure AD B2C is more for publicly facing applications, public web applications, things that anybody could kind of sign into, Facebook, Twitter, GitHub accounts, those types of things?
Sure.
And
so
then,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And then Azure AD is more so like internal applications, like, my company is my customer, you know what I mean? And so we're all under the same tenant. And so now, I'm going to expect you to use like that company tenants to off.
Yeah, either that or I'm selling my software to businesses who want to sign in with their corporate identities. Yeah. So I'm selling software, and I don't want to say, oh, you have to set up an account to use my app. It's like, no, I'm using my corporate app. I have users here, they're going to use their corporate identity. So if I'm using that, then I'm using Azure AD. If I want to reach out directly publicly facing, so some of our examples, for example, the folks at Subway sell their sandwiches using Azure AD B2C. FIFA organizes their World Cup attendance and notifications and such, and so on. So those are the people who are reaching directly to their customers, that public-facing view, as you mentioned, Cecil, and Azure AD B2C is a great choice for that.
Awesome.
Plus, it gives you 50,000 free users per month, right? So that's a fantastic way.
Active users, yes.
Active users, fine. Unlimited sign-ins for 50,000 active users. There you go.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. So looks like we covered most of the questions in the chat so far. If you all have any more questions for Christos and Cal, please feel free to go ahead and drop them in the chat. We are looking at them across YouTube and Twitch. So wherever you're watching, we are going to try and service your questions. One thing that I want to ask the both of you now. So we've seen how to do the app registration. We've seen how to kind of plug in our app using like that NuGet package. What are some of the things that we can expect for upcoming versions of Identity.Web? Whether it be new templates or Visual Studio experiences, maybe different application models like serverless and things of that nature. Like, is there anything else that's interesting that we could expect to see coming in the future?
I have one really big one. Christos, could you scroll down there a little bit on your window? Enable support for continuous access evaluation.
Yes.
This is a huge new feature of Microsoft Identity in general. So what's going to happen here is we now have a way to revoke a token. So I give you an access token today to say Microsoft Graph, and it's good for an hour. And now if something happens to the user during that hour, we kind of have to wait for the token to expire at the end of its hour before it stops being able to be used. But now, with continuous access evaluation, we can revoke that token in moments. So within minutes, the user can no longer access something. So I've got a stolen device. I revoke that user's sessions, and instead of being able to use it for the remainder of whatever his token life space is for an hour, boom, it's invalidated in moments, and that is much more secure. On top of that, for your application, since we can revoke the token, we'll give you a token with a much, much longer lifespan. So instead of an hour, it'll be a day, maybe a day, something like that, right? And what's really cool is, under some conditions, and this is regular for us, we can instruct our MSOL libraries, or Microsoft.Identity.Web in this case, to refresh the tokens well before the end of their lifespan. So I give you a token for 24 hours. I say to our Microsoft Identity Web, you can refresh that token in 12 hours. So now I've got 12 hours to reacquire a token before I need it. That means if the internet goes down between me and Microsoft Identity, or any other interruption of any description, I can survive that as long as it's less than 12 hours.
Nice.
So now the resiliency of my application has increased dramatically. The security of my application has increased dramatically. And this is just, but it does require cooperation from developers, because what's going to happen is we're going to give you a 401 on an API call to, say, Microsoft Graph, which is in preview today, and that's what's going to tell you need to go get a new token. So we do have a doc up on our documentation that tells you how to do this, because what you have to do is you have to watch the Graph API calls, and when we give you a 401 with something called the claims challenge, you'll say, oh, I need to take that claims challenge and go back and get a token. So the fact that we have built this into our latest Microsoft.Identity.Web release is a real big deal.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
and then
super
quick question
exciting.
from Daryl coming in from YouTube about that revocation you spoke about. He's asking, is the revocation claim-based, or is it achieved through reference tokens?
Neither. It's achieved by the fact of you attempting to use the token to the API, because where the actual listening is happening is between Microsoft Identity and the API implementation. So we set up a push channel so that we can push revocation events directly to the API. And then when you use the API, which is what you were going to do anyway, we can tell you to revoke the token. So the API isn't calling us all the time to say, is the token okay? Is the token okay? Is the token okay?
Yeah.
And neither is your client, right? We just push the notification out, if you will, done it. We push the event out to the API and say, the next time that the app presents a token, say it's no good and tell them to come back and talk to us.
That's awesome. It's almost like when we used to talk about like long polling with real-time events.
Yes.
You know, it's always better to get told versus like continue
Yes.
asking. Are we there yet?
Yep.
Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Okay, we're there now. You can stop asking me. That's
Exactly.
awesome.
Yeah. CAE is fantastic. I can't wait to start demoing it and working with it. And it's still in preview, so it's early days. The standard has not been ratified, but we are working towards making it happen.
I do have a demo, but we're out of time. But
Sure,
it is turned on for Microsoft Graph in a preview mode.
Yeah.
So you can start as your test apps and working on your development. You can go and try that right now.
Nice. All right. I think the only other question we had in the chat, really quick, Mohammed on Twitter, Mohammed was asking, can we use it for API gateway?
I think it was for the B2C stuff.
I'm guessing he means API management.
Yeah, I think it's for the B2C stuff that we're talking earlier on, which is fine. Yeah, if you have APIs and you need to, or proxy APIs that you need to authenticate, then you can use B2C as well for that. There are certain limitations that we currently have with B2C, which can cover at a different time. But let's say you have multiple front ends that need to call an API or an API gateway. You can authenticate with B2C, and API management also supports JWT token validation with B2C as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. So like Cal said, we are running low on time. But before we go, why don't you tell us what are some of the places that we could continue to learn about security, maybe you have docs. I hear there's a live stream show that happens in another channel that might be interesting to go check out from time to time. Like, where are some great places that I could continue to learn about Identity.Web and interact some more with like the identity team?
Kyle, you go first and I'll go second.
Okay. So we do have our a couple of things. We have a space on Microsoft Q&A. I should have had the links available. I'm sorry, we'll have to post them later. Is a great place for us to do question and answer. Our primary documentation, if you go to aka.ms/AADDev, one word, AADDEV, you'll get to our primary documentations. We actually have links there now to lots of videos and additional information on this on documentation. And then, of course, we have Christos and his efforts.
Not just me; it's a team effort.
That's true.
As Kyle's saying, me and JP do have a stream that happens every Tuesday and Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Everything ends up on YouTube as well. So if you can watch it live, you can always watch it on the side. We're on Instagram and we're even on TikTok. I'm not promising any dancing there, but you can reach out to us. Discord is also very important. We have a fantastic and vibrant community there. You can reach out to us on Discord, and obviously Twitter. That's one of the places that we interact with a lot of identity friends and folks. So let us know if you have any questions. If you stumble across, if you want to know more stuff, we can help you out. Obviously, the official forum is there. And in many cases, we direct people to the official support Q&A, because that's where people can get answers and build knowledge bases. But in the meantime, we appreciate your help and your feedback, and we'll try to make a better, more secure community here. So thank you, Cecil, for having us.
Sure. And I just shared the link to the 425 show as well in the chat. So if anyone, again, wants to go ahead and check out the show, how often are you guys on? You guys are on a couple times a week. I feel like every time I come on Twitch, you're on.
It's Tuesday, and now we have a Wednesday show that is dedicated to IT pros. Like yesterday, we did a passwordless session using YubiKeys and switching that on for all the developers that want to build secure apps. But usually it's Tuesday and Friday, unless we decide to do impromptu things. The Discord is 425 show/Discord/join. I'll send a link on the chat.
Okay, great. Awesome. All right. Well, gentlemen, again, thank you all so much for coming on. I feel a lot more comfortable now diving into and like adding security to my APIs. After we get off the show and after I finish working out, I might come and try and put something together just to kind of see how it feels. So definitely thank you for sharing this with me and like the rest of our guests. And maybe we'll have you come back on in a couple of months and we could see some of that, some of how those client capabilities and stuff look like after they're ready to go.
Yeah.
All right. Good. Well, thanks, everybody. See you. And we'll be back next week. So make sure you come back next week. Okay. That's it. Bye.